Simon trusted logic more than whispers in the dark until the night the world around him fell silent, and something impossible stepped through that silence. An alien revealed that a massive energy wave will hit Earth in 2026, and we're not ready. This wasn't prophecy. It wasn't superstition. It was a disclosure that rewrote everything he thought was real. Before we go deeper, leave a trace in the comments. Your city, your country, anywhere you stand on this fragile planet. It helps me know who's awake enough to hear the rest. And if something in your chest tightens as you listen, don't ignore it. That's resonance. Settle your breath, quiet your thoughts, and follow me into the moment when Simon's world and ours began to shift. Simon had always trusted what could be measured, calculated, or proven. His world was built on spreadsheets, data sets, and the comforting certainty that nothing existed beyond what the human mind could dissect. He dismissed every story of strange lights in the sky or unexplained encounters as psychological misfires. His life had no room for the unseen. That certainty began to fracture on an ordinary evening that refused to stay ordinary. It began with a silence that did not belong to Earth. Not the quiet of late night, not the calm after traffic fades, but a hollow stillness that felt manufactured. The wind stopped mid-breath. Leaves froze on branches. Even the faint hum of distant power lines dissolved into nothing. Simon stepped outside, instinctively scanning the street for the logical explanation he believed must exist. But the world felt paused, as if someone had pressed their finger against time itself. He sensed it before he saw it, a shift in the air like pressure building behind invisible walls. Then a pale light formed above his house, too still to be natural, too precise to be atmospheric. It did not shine downward. It sculpted the darkness around it, bending every shadow inward as if the night were being pulled toward a center point only it understood. Simon's breath caught, not from fear, but from the disorienting realization that his logical mind could not frame what was unfolding. The light expanded in slow, deliberate pulses, each one vibrating through his chest with the faint resonance of something ancient. Instinct urged him to run, yet his body stayed anchored, not by paralysis but by a strange, gravitational awe. His surroundings blurred at the edges, colors draining from the world until only the pale glow above him felt real. Then the ground released him. It happened without warning, without sound. One moment his feet were on solid floor. The next he was rising smoothly into the air, weightless, breathless, suspended in a force that felt gentle yet absolute. The ceiling did not break. It simply thinned, becoming translucent, then immaterial, as he passed through it, as though the laws of matter had been rewritten only for him. Simon's final coherent thought before the world dissolved into light was a single, impossible truth. Nothing he believed about reality was safe anymore. Simon awoke to a sensation that defied every definition of consciousness he understood. It was not like returning from sleep, nor like surfacing from a dream. It felt more like being assembled again, piece by piece, as though awareness had been taken apart and then placed gently back into his body. When his eyes finally adjusted, he found himself inside a chamber he could not have imagined, even in his most abstract thoughts. The room was perfectly circular, metallic yet alive, its surface rippling with faint movements like breath beneath a thin layer of liquid silver. The air hummed with a low resonance that seemed to vibrate through bone rather than ear. There was no visible source of light, yet everything was illuminated with a soft, cold glow that made shadows unnecessary. Simon's mind searched for familiar points of reference, but the chamber offered none. It existed outside the vocabulary of human architecture. A shift in the atmosphere drew his attention. Something entered the space with a presence that felt deliberate and intelligent. A tall figure emerged from the shimmering wall itself, gliding forward without footsteps, as though the ground held no authority over it. Its body emitted a white luminescence that never flickered, and its movements were fluid, like a being carved from light rather than flesh. But it was the eyes that seized him, two silver pools, with no visible pupils, reflecting his confusion and fear with unsettling clarity. The air around Simon thickened, not with sound but with a pressure that seemed to settle inside his mind. Then a voice formed in his thoughts, quiet yet absolutely clear, bypassing every physical sense. It called him by name. It spoke with a calmness that felt ancient. It said a name he did not know. Simon felt a cold wave crawl down his spine. There was no mouth moving, no breath, no sound in the chamber at all, yet the communication was undeniable. The presence of this being was overwhelming, not in hostility, but in the sheer weight of its existence. The chamber vibrated softly, as if responding to the creature's presence, or perhaps to Simon's rising realization that whatever he had awakened into was not meant for human certainty. He understood only one thing. The world he had known was gone, and something far beyond it had begun. The chamber's quiet hum deepened, as if the very structure around Simon acknowledged the presence of the being before him. Nalnis did not move closer, yet the air shifted with a density that suggested intention. Simon felt the pressure of an unspoken message gathering, forming, preparing to enter his mind the way the first words had. There was no suspense in the creature's demeanor, no sense of hesitation or emotional shading. What came next arrived with the precision of a fact delivered by something incapable of doubt. The voice entered him again, not through hearing but through a direct imprint on thought itself. It felt colder this time, heavier, as though the information carried its own gravity. Nalnis did not speak with the cadence of warning or prediction. The message lacked drama entirely. It simply existed, complete and absolute. A massive energy wave is approaching Earth. The words fell inside Simon like stones, sinking through deep water. There was no context, no explanation, only a truth presented without permission. His mind attempted to grasp it, to translate it into some known scientific framework. But the phrase resisted categorization. It did not feel metaphorical. It felt final. Arrival. The year 2026. The chamber pulsed faintly when the year echoed through him, as though the structure responded to temporal references. Simon's breath tightened. The date was close, unbearably close, and the certainty in the voice left no space for argument. It was not an estimate or hypothesis. It was an event already set in motion, indifferent to belief. Nalnis continued the transmission without pause. This is not prophecy. It is not prediction. It is cosmic inevitability. The statement settled inside him with an eerie certainty. As though his body recognized a truth his mind could not yet accept. The wave was not described as destructive or benevolent. There was no emotional charge surrounding it, no indication of intention. It was simply coming, vast and inescapable, like a tide rising from a shore humanity did not know existed. The chamber's vibrations grew more intricate, forming patterns Simon could not interpret, as if reality itself was adjusting to the weight of what had been spoken. He felt the unsettling awareness that his life, once defined by rationality and predictable laws, had been pulled into a larger design long before he realized it. Nothing about the announcement felt distant. It felt imminent and terrifyingly certain. The silence that followed the announcement was not empty. It felt weighted, as though the chamber itself paused to let the truth settle into whatever part of Simon was still capable of absorbing it. Nalnis remained motionless, a tall figure sculpted from light, yet Simon sensed activity around him. The metallic walls pulsed with a slow rhythm, responding to something unseen, as if the chamber were breathing in unison with the message that was about to unfold. When Nalnis spoke again, the voice did not carry urgency or comfort. It carried scale. Simon felt his thoughts widen, as though they were being stretched to accommodate a concept too large for the mind that held them. The event approaching Earth is not physical destruction. The words vibrated through him, precise and cold. Simon's instinctive relief lasted only a moment before the next truth descended with far greater weight. It is a galactic consciousness wave. The phrase sounded impossible, yet the certainty behind it did not allow disbelief to take root. Images that were not images flickered through Simon's mind, impressions of vast currents moving through the fabric of the galaxy, not made of matter or radiation, but something deeper, something that felt alive. It was neither light nor energy as science defined it. It was presence on a scale beyond human measurement. It emerges from the center of the galaxy every 12,000 years. The number echoed with the resonance of cycles too ancient for Earth's recorded history. Simon felt the unsettling realization that humanity existed inside a pattern it had never recognized, one that continued with or without acknowledgement. Your science has no name for it. Nalnis released this truth without criticism, simply an observation that human understanding had not yet reached the threshold required to perceive what was coming. Simon sensed that even if humanity had detected fragments of its approach, the interpretation would have been dismissed, mislabeled, or buried. Ancient civilizations called it the Great Awakening Pulse. The chamber brightened slightly, as though the name carried its own luminosity. Simon felt a faint tremor inside his chest, not fear but recognition. An inexplicable sense that this term had echoed through humanity's forgotten past. Civilizations long erased had known something modern minds ignored. Nalnis allowed the weight of the revelation to sink deeper. This wave did not arrive to destroy, it arrived to reveal. And revelation, Simon realized, could be far more terrifying than destruction. The chamber dimmed, not into darkness but into something that felt closer to a lowered heartbeat. The metallic walls softened their glow, becoming a muted silver that pulsed in slow, deliberate intervals. It was as if the space itself understood that what Nalnis was about to reveal required a quieter atmosphere, a stillness where truth could land without resistance. Simon felt a faint tightening in his chest, an instinctive sense that the explanation he had asked for was one his world was not prepared to hear. Nalnis released a wave of impressions into Simon's awareness, not images, not sounds, but patterns of emotion woven together. Simon sensed fear beneath the surface of humanity, not the sharp panic of danger, but the slow, corrosive kind that accumulates through years of distraction and unrest. He felt division like fractures in a glass sphere, spreading outward with every conflict humans nurtured. Emotional suppression appeared as dense shadows clinging to millions of minds, unexpressed pain turning inward until it hardened into weight. Overstimulation surged like static, relentless and numbing, drowning out intuition until people could no longer hear their own inner signals. Humanity's collective frequency is unstable. The words rang inside Simon with the force of a diagnosis delivered without anesthesia. Nalnis allowed the meaning to settle before continuing. The coming wave does not alter appearances, it amplifies energy. Whatever resides within the human mind will be magnified. Whatever lies dormant will be awakened. Simon felt the implications ripple through him like a cold wind. The wave was not an external phenomenon to be avoided or resisted. It was a mirror, one that magnified inner realities until they could no longer be denied or hidden. High frequency expands. Low frequency fractures. Nalnis imparted the truths without judgment, but their neutrality made them all the more unsettling. He saw glimpses of people filled with coherence, compassion, clarity. In them, the wave accelerated growth, awareness, connection. He saw others burdened by unresolved grief, anger, loneliness, resentment. The wave did not punish them. It simply intensified what already existed until their inner structures could no longer withstand the pressure. Simon realized the danger was not the wave itself, but what humanity carried into it. A civilization overflowing with unprocessed emotion was about to be placed beneath a cosmic magnifying glass. And the result would not be uniform. It would be a splitting of paths, determined not by belief, but by frequency. The chamber shifted again, its silvery walls rippling outward, as if responding to a hidden command. Simon felt the air thicken, not with heat or weight, but with meaning, as though the space around him carried memories older than Earth itself. Nalnis did not gesture or move, yet the environment transformed. The metallic floor beneath Simon softened into a surface that held light like water. The walls dissolved into a sphere of shimmering patterns, and for a moment, Simon sensed he was standing inside a mind far greater than his own. The first vision rose like mist. A vast island civilization appeared suspended in the chamber, not as a map or drawing, but as a living echo. Towering structures shaped from crystal and stone stretched toward an unfamiliar sky. Oceans glimmered with impossible clarity. Simon recognized it not from memory, but from collective myth. Atlantis. It pulsed with brilliance, innovation, and harmony, a civilization thriving in coherence. Then the scene trembled, not from war or disaster, but from the inside, as if consciousness itself had pulled apart. Half the population adapted, elevating into a higher frequency the wave amplified. The other half resisted, clinging to fear. The split fractured their reality, not the earth beneath them. The vision dissolved, replaced by another. A continent drowned in fog. Lemuria. Its people moved with a gentleness Simon had never seen, connected to nature with a depth modern humanity had forgotten. Their fall was not fiery or sudden. It was gradual, a fading of collective alignment as the cosmic pulse touched them and magnified what they had not resolved. They did not perish. They separated, some ascending into dimensions human senses could not perceive, others descending into survival-driven consciousness. A third civilization emerged, pre-dynastic Egypt, but not the version history books preserved. This one glowed with an inner radiance, guided by beings who understood the cycles of the galaxy. They prepared, adapted, and endured the pulse, but over generations their knowledge fractured. The remnants became myths, symbols, and architectural riddles. Nalnis released the visions gently, allowing Simon to feel the thread that connected them all. None were destroyed by the wave. They were divided by it. Consciousness split, and civilizations followed. The cycle was repeating. The next pulse was approaching. And humanity, unaware of its own forgotten past, stood at the edge of the same decision those ancient worlds once faced. The visions faded slowly, like ancient memories retreating back into the chamber's metallic walls. The air settled into a quieter hum, yet Simon sensed that something far heavier was about to be revealed. Nalnis had shown him civilizations that rose and fell not because of physical catastrophe, but because of what happened within their own consciousness. Now the alien presence shifted its focus, turning from history to the fragile world Simon had come from. The atmosphere thickened with an unspoken truth, one that felt closer, sharper, impossible to escape. Without movement or gesture, Nalnis released another stream of impressions into Simon's mind. This time there were no grand cities, no forgotten continents, no cosmic cycles unfolding across millennia. Instead, Simon felt the pulse of modern humanity. Millions of minds flickered like scattered points of unstable light, each carrying its own storms beneath the surface. The fear was not loud. It was subtle, constant, woven into everyday life. Fear of failure, fear of loss, fear of irrelevance, fear of not being enough. These fears accumulated in layers, buried under routines, distractions, and noise, yet always trembling beneath the surface. Humans fear external threats. The truth vibrated through him, cold and precise. War, collapsing markets, environmental instability, political turmoil. Humanity built entire identities around defending itself from dangers it could point to, label, measure, and argue about. But Nalnis illuminated a deeper layer, one that humanity rarely confronted. The real disruption is internal. Simon felt it instantly, a recognition so sharp it bordered on pain. The coming wave was not designed to break structures or topple nations. It was designed to illuminate everything people hid from themselves. Suppressed emotions rose like dark water. Unprocessed trauma coiled at the base of the human psyche, waiting for a catalyst. Unexamined fear sat like an anchor in countless hearts, shaping choices in silence. The wave will ignite what has been buried. Nalnis did not speak with warning or threat, only certainty. The energy approaching Earth would enter minds, not landscapes. It would amplify what humans avoided, forcing unresolved wounds to surface with an intensity that could no longer be outrun or numbed. Some would awaken. Some would collapse beneath the weight of their own reflection. Simon realized the most dangerous place to be during the pulse was not outside in the world. It was inside one's own mind. The chamber grew unnervingly still, its soft vibrations fading until Simon felt as if he were suspended inside a void rather than a structure. The shift was subtle yet deliberate, like the quiet intake of breath before a truth too personal for distance. Until now, Nalnis had shown him the fate of civilizations, the vast patterns of cosmic cycles, the instability of collective humanity. But the atmosphere changed in a way Simon could not explain. The weight of attention narrowed, turning inward, focusing not on Earth, but on him alone. A sensation rippled through the air, neither warm nor cold, but intimate in its precision. Nalnis was not revealing something new. Nalnis was uncovering what Simon had always known but refused to acknowledge. The impressions entered him with a softness that made them even more difficult to endure. He saw the patterns of his life not as memories, but as frequencies, each one carrying its own resonance. He felt the years he had spent building walls around himself, convinced that independence equaled safety. He felt the constant overthinking, the endless loops of analysis he used to avoid confronting what he truly felt. He saw the nights he drowned in work not from ambition, but from fear of stopping long enough to face the emptiness he kept buried. He felt the subtle but relentless habit of emotional distance, the hesitations, the avoidance, the instinct to hide vulnerability behind effort and logic. These patterns will amplify during the wave. The realization struck deeper than any warning about humanity. The cosmic pulse was not selective. It did not target nations or systems. It magnified the frequencies within each individual, shining mercilessly into their inner landscapes. Simon saw his own patterns, reacting to that amplification, stretching, tightening, fracturing. He understood with visceral clarity that the wave would not break him. His own unresolved inner world would. "This is why you were brought here." The statement echoed inside him, expanding until it became impossible to ignore. Nalnis had not chosen him for knowledge or intellect. Simon was here because the wave would intensify the very structures he had used to avoid feeling alive. The cosmic threat was not external. It was the mirror being lifted toward him, forcing reflection where he had practiced avoidance for a lifetime. In the silence that followed, Simon felt the first tremor of fear that did not come from the unknown, but from finally being seen. The chamber shifted around Simon with a smoothness that felt more like a change in consciousness than movement. The metallic floor dissolved beneath him, not disappearing, but transforming into something transparent and depthless, as though he now stood on the surface of a silent lake. The walls expanded outward into a vast sphere, their texture darkening until they resembled polished obsidian. Nalnis did not speak, yet Simon sensed the intention clearly. He had been taken into another level of this place, a space designed not for explanation, but for revelation. A faint glow emerged from the center of the chamber, spreading outward in slow, deliberate ripples. Each ripple carried a strange vibration, subtle but unmistakably alive. When the light reached the walls, the obsidian surface shimmered and fractured into thousands of facets. Like mirrors waiting for something to awaken them, Simon felt a tug in the air, gentle but undeniable. And then the mirrors ignited. They did not reflect his face. They reflected his life. Scenes appeared around him, suspended in the dark sphere, like memories turned tangible. He saw himself at 8 years old, standing rigid as adults argued around him, learning in silence that emotions were dangerous. He saw himself at 16, burying disappointment behind forced detachment. He saw himself at 29, choosing work over connection, convincing himself it was ambition when it was really avoidance. Every moment he had pushed down, dismissed, or outrun surfaced with chilling clarity. Each memory carried a frequency, and Simon could feel them vibrating in the air around him. Some were sharp and cold, formed from fear. Others were heavy, shaped from unspoken grief. A few flickered with loneliness he had ignored for so long it had become familiar. The chamber amplified each resonance, revealing how these buried energies had guided him without his awareness. This was the frequency he had been living in. He had not seen it before because he had never looked. But in this place, denial had no weight. He sensed something deeper, a truth that tightened the air. Under the coming wave, these frequencies would not stay hidden. They would surge, expand, overwhelm the fragile structures he had built to contain them. The mirrors dimmed, but the truth remained. His inner world was not ready, and under the pulse of the year 2026, it would either shatter or transform. The chamber released the last fragments of Simon's memories, allowing the mirrors to darken until they became polished shadows once more. The air settled with a quiet heaviness, as if acknowledging that something irreversible had taken place. Simon could still feel the frequencies of his own past vibrating faintly inside him, like distant echoes refusing to fade. Nalnis had not spoken throughout the vision, yet Simon sensed a shift in the alien presence, a subtle preparation for something far more intimate than history or warning. What came next was not about ancient civilizations or collective patterns. It was about the human body itself, the fragile vessel that would receive the approaching wave. Nalnis drew Simon's awareness inward, guiding his focus toward the biology he had always assumed was fixed and limited. A quiet pulsation moved through the chamber, aligning with Simon's heartbeat until he could no longer distinguish between the rhythm of the space and the rhythm inside his chest. In that merging, Nalnis began to reveal the changes that the wave would ignite. The first impression was electrical. Simon felt currents firing through him, quick and sharp, like neural circuitry awakening. Heightened neural activity. The wave would amplify the electrical impulses within the human brain, accelerating thought, perception, and awareness. For some, this acceleration would unlock clarity, insight, creativity. For others, the sudden intensity would overwhelm the delicate balance of their minds, leading to panic, dissociation, or mental collapse. The difference would depend entirely on inner stability. The next current carried emotional weight. Simon felt emotions surge through him that were not entirely his own. Waves of feeling rising and falling with unfamiliar intensity. Emotional amplification. The pulse would magnify what people already carried. Joy becoming euphoria, grief becoming despair, fear becoming terror. Emotions long buried would break through the surface with a force that could not be contained. Resistance would fracture the psyche. Surrender would allow release and transformation. Another ripple passed through him, this one slower, heavier, like the weight of exhausted nights. Disrupted sleep cycles. The wave would interfere with the natural rhythms of human consciousness, blurring the boundary between waking and dreaming. Many would experience vivid visions, insomnia, or fragmented rest. Some would believe they were losing their grip on reality. Others would discover new layers of perception emerging in the quiet hours when the mind loosened its control. Then came a whisper, not spoken but sensed, intuitive activation. Simon felt a sharp clarity rise within him, a knowing without thought. The wave would open channels of awareness humans had forgotten how to use. Instinct would sharpen. Patterns would become obvious. People would sense truths before understanding them. This activation would frighten those who clung to logic alone, yet empower those who allowed both intellect and intuition to coexist. Finally, the deepest current emerged from below his awareness. Subconscious content rising. Simon felt the weight of memories, fears, desires, and wounds he had never acknowledged, pushing upward, demanding recognition. The wave would drag the hidden self into the light. Whatever was unresolved would surface. Whatever was suppressed would speak. Nalnis allowed the final truth to settle like a stone dropped into still water. Those who resist will suffer. Those who surrender will evolve. It was not a threat, but a natural law. The wave was not choosing sides. It would amplify whatever lived within the human mind. Whether that amplification destroyed or transformed would depend on a single choice: to hold on or to let go. The chamber's atmosphere shifted again, this time with a sharper undertone, as though Simon had stepped from the realm of cosmic truth into something far more human, far more fragile. Nalnis did not emit light or gesture, yet Simon sensed the presence tightening around him, preparing him for a revelation not born of the stars, but of the world he thought he understood. What came next was not ancient nor spiritual. It was alarmingly familiar. The metallic walls brightened in thin vertical lines, forming what looked like countless columns of data suspended in the air. Numbers, diagrams, waveforms, and graphs appeared, layered in translucent sheets that rotated slowly around Simon. He recognized them instantly. Scientific readouts. The kind produced by research institutions, observatories, and classified monitoring stations scattered across Earth. His pulse quickened. These were not visions. They were records. Nalnis guided Simon's awareness deeper into the floating data until he could see the earliest entries. They dated back more than a decade. Gamma distortions first. Small anomalies that astronomers dismissed as instrumentation errors. Yet, the patterns grew, repeating and intensifying. Magnetic fluctuations followed, detected by satellites and deep space probes. Subtle shifts at first, then increasingly rhythmic, as though responding to a distant heartbeat. The anomalies did not align with solar activity, planetary motion, or known cosmic events. They came from the galactic center, pulsing outward like an unseen tide. Earth's space agencies noticed. Nalnis revealed documents stamped with red markers, classified beyond public access, containing reports written in the dry language of scientific restraint. The conclusions were always vague. The tone was always cautious, yet each report carried an undercurrent of unease. Something was approaching, something measurable, yet not fully definable. Governments chose silence. Simon saw meetings captured as fragmented impressions, briefings behind closed doors, officials sitting in dim chambers speaking in controlled, uncertain tones. They debated whether the anomalies indicated a threat, a natural cycle, or a system malfunction. No one agreed. But the decision repeated in every region, every nation, every spacefaring agency: do not disclose. The public would panic. The implications were unknown. More data was required. Always more data. Even though the patterns were already unmistakable. Nalnis let Simon feel the heavy truth embedded beneath the secrecy. They know something is coming, but not what. Human institutions, built on authority and certainty, were powerless in the face of a phenomenon that defied the frameworks they relied on. Instead of preparing the world, they observed in silence, hoping the anomalies would stabilize, hoping the unexplained would explain itself, hoping the sky would remain predictable. But the sky had already begun to change. Simon sensed a bitter irony in the hidden documents. The data hinted at the pulse long before any human understood its meaning. Space agencies recorded the symptoms without recognizing the cause. Governments detected the pattern without seeing the cycle. Humanity possessed the clues, yet lacked the memory to decode them. Nalnis allowed the data to dissolve back into silver mist. The chamber dimmed, the silence returned. And Simon understood with chilling clarity that the greatest threat was not the wave itself, but humanity's refusal to see what was already unfolding above them. The remnants of classified data dissolved into a faint silver haze, leaving the chamber in a state of poised silence. Simon felt the air grow denser, as if Nalnis were preparing to reveal something older than science, older than governments, older than the languages humanity used to describe its own existence. The alien presence shifted subtly, and the chamber responded, darkening until only a single point of light hovered before Simon like an ember suspended in a void. The ember expanded, unraveling into symbols carved into ancient clay. Weathered edges, fractured surfaces, and precise markings appeared as though they had materialized from beneath layers of forgotten time. Simon recognized the style, though he had only ever seen such images in textbooks and documentaries. Sumerian tablets. Their inscriptions glowed faintly, each line animated by a meaning his modern mind had never been taught to see. Nalnis allowed the symbols to pulse, and in their rhythmic flicker, Simon sensed an echo of a story far older than recorded history. The tablet spoke of a cycle, a great breath of the cosmos that descended every 12,000 years. It did not speak of destruction, but of awakening, a force that stirred the human spirit until dormant abilities rose to the surface like embers reignited. The scene shifted with no sense of transition. The Sumerian tablets dissolved into flowing Vedic script etched in gold against a background of deep indigo. Simon felt the depth of these writings, not as words, but as vibrations. They described a cosmic tide that swept through existence, dissolving illusion and amplifying truth. It was said to awaken the devas within humanity, not as deities, but as capacities sleeping inside the human soul. Before Simon could process the connection, the chamber morphed again. Now he stood surrounded by towering stone walls carved with hieroglyphs. Egyptian inscriptions unfurled across every surface, illuminated from within by a soft golden glow. The figures depicted humans standing beneath a radiating sphere, their bodies surrounded by waves of energy. The accompanying scripts spoke not of gods descending from the sky, but of humans rising into their forgotten potential when touched by the celestial breath. A final transition enveloped him. Mayan codices appeared in layered folds, painted with vibrant pigments that seemed impossibly preserved. In this ancient vision, humans were shown undergoing transformation as a luminous wave crossed the earth, their identities dissolving into something more expansive, more luminous, more aware. Nalnis allowed all four civilizations to overlap, their symbols weaving into one coherent tapestry. Different cultures, different eras, different languages, yet all describing the same event, a cosmic pulse that awakens dormant gods within humans. Simon felt the meaning strike him with a force beyond intellectual understanding. These were not myths, they were memories. Records from people who had lived through cycles humanity no longer remembered. The chamber brightened slightly, as if affirming the truth now settling inside him. Every culture had encoded the same warning, the same opportunity, the same transformation. Not metaphor, not allegory. A cycle as real as the movement of the stars. And the next pulse was already on its way. The chamber seemed to exhale, releasing the ancient symbols back into the quiet void from which they had emerged. Simon felt their weight linger in him, not as information, but as a haunting familiarity, as though some forgotten part of humanity recognized what modern minds had dismissed. Nalnis allowed the silence to deepen until it became almost tangible, a stillness so complete, Simon sensed that the next revelation would not concern the past, but the fragile line of possibilities stretching ahead. The darkness around him brightened in two directions at once, forming parallel visions suspended in the air like twin worlds waiting to be chosen. Nalnis did not explain either one directly. Instead, Simon was made to feel them, as though the probabilities themselves were living entities breathing against his skin. The first vision unfolded with a heavy vibration, a frequency that churned with tension. Earth appeared as Simon knew it, but amplified. Fear pulsed through cities like electricity, spreading faster than the wave itself. People clung desperately to old structures, resisting change with frantic determination. In this potential future, the energy wave did not awaken humanity. It exposed every wound that had been ignored, every fracture that had been denied. Emotional overload led to psychological instability. Institutions collapsed under the weight of their own rigidity. Individuals who had spent lifetimes suppressing their inner darkness felt it erupt uncontrollably. The chaos was not external destruction, it was internal detonation. Those who resisted the pulse fractured beneath its intensity. Entire societies spiraled into confusion, attempting to cling to a world no longer compatible with the frequency rising beneath their feet. Technology became a crutch instead of a tool. Division deepened, identity splintered. The fear of awakening overshadowed the awakening itself. Simon felt the heaviness of this future press against him like a cold wind. Then the chamber shifted. The second vision emerged with a lightness that vibrated differently, carrying a warmth that spread through Simon's chest. In this timeline, the wave did not break humanity. It elevated it. People who chose surrender rather than resistance experienced rapid expansion of perception. Creativity flourished. Intuition sharpened. Cooperation replaced conflict. Emotional wounds, long buried, rose to the surface not as eruptions but as opportunities for healing. Simon saw individuals rediscovering capacities once thought mythical. The boundary between thought and intuition blurred. Human connection deepened beyond language. Children adapted instantly, becoming guides for adults who were willing to learn humility. Societies restructured themselves organically, guided not by fear but by coherence. This was not a utopia. It was an evolution born from willingness to face the truth within. Nalnis allowed both futures to exist before Simon in perfect balance. Neither was guaranteed, neither was fixed. The wave carried one truth: amplification. Humanity's response would shape the outcome. The creature's presence pressed gently against Simon's mind with a final realization. The timeline was not destiny. It was a crossroads, and humanity stood with one foot in each future. The wave would arrive regardless. What it encountered when it touched Earth depended entirely on what lived within the hearts of its people. Collective readiness, not cosmic force, would determine which world humanity stepped into. The twin futures dissolved into the chamber's dim light, fading like mist drawn back into an unseen horizon. Simon felt the echoes of both timelines lingering inside him, heavy and luminous at the same time, as if the possibilities had imprinted themselves on his chest. The silence that followed was not empty. It held a strange expectancy, a pause that suggested the next truth would shift Simon's understanding not of the wave, but of the being who stood before him. Nalnis did not move, yet the chamber brightened subtly, drawing Simon's attention toward the alien's presence. Until now, the revelations had been directed outward, focused on Earth, humanity, and the approaching pulse. But the energy in the room shifted, turning inward, narrowing its focus on the nature of the messenger itself. Simon felt Nalnis opening a door within his perception. A gentle but undeniable invitation to understand a species that existed far beyond human comprehension. Nalnis's voice entered his mind with a calmness that felt almost ancient. Their species did not intervene in physical events. They did not manipulate environments, alter planetary paths, or interfere in the natural progression of civilizations. They were observers, not rulers. Guides, not architects. The cosmos, Nalnis revealed, unfolded according to principles so intricate that interference from any single species could fracture the delicate balance of evolution. Simon sensed the truth behind the statement. Nalnis did not carry the energy of conquest or manipulation. There was no agenda of dominance. Instead, the alien presence felt aligned with something far more subtle: the movement of consciousness itself. Nalnis explained that their kind did not traverse the galaxy through machines or propulsion. They moved by shifting awareness, traveling along the vast currents of consciousness that flowed between stars and civilizations like invisible rivers. To them, distance was not a barrier. Time was not a chain. Space was not an obstacle. They reached worlds not by crossing them, but by attuning to the frequency of those who were ready to perceive them. Simon felt the magnitude of this. Nalnis's form, the ship, the chamber were not mechanical constructs. They were manifestations shaped to meet human perception halfway. Their true existence lay in layers of reality the human mind had not yet learned to access. What Simon saw was a translation, a bridge. Nalnis's mission became clear. Their species watched for cyclical pulses, the great waves that echoed from the galactic center every 12,000 years. They monitored worlds approaching these thresholds, sensing which civilizations teetered on the edge of collapse and which stood ready for transformation. They did not save planets. They did not prevent cycles. The wave was part of universal design, older than stars, woven into the evolution of consciousness. Their role was warning. They appeared to species capable of listening, offering understanding before the pulse arrived. Not instructions, not commandments. Awareness. Nalnis explained that some civilizations ignored the warnings and fell into fragmentation. Others awakened and stepped into higher forms of existence. A few listened partially, transforming slowly but surviving the transition. Simon felt the weight of this quiet responsibility. Nalnis was not here to rescue Earth. Nalnis was here because humanity had reached the last moment of choice, the fragile pause before the cosmic tide arrived. Their final message pressed into Simon's awareness with profound simplicity. We do not interfere. We illuminate. The path chosen is always your own. And Simon understood that the warning was not a demand, but an offering placed gently into humanity's trembling hands. A low resonance began to move through the chamber, a vibration so subtle Simon felt it more in his bones than in his ears. It grew slowly, like a distant tide approaching a shoreline. Nalnis's presence shifted with it, becoming less defined, less bound to shape, as though preparing Simon for a truth that words alone could not carry. The air thickened with a peculiar familiarity, as if something inside Simon already knew what was coming, but had lived a lifetime pretending not to remember. The walls around him softened, dissolving into a vast expanse of shimmering darkness. Not empty darkness, but a living field, threaded with faint currents of light weaving in every direction. The chamber had vanished. The ship had vanished. Even Nalnis's luminous form blurred, merging with the expanse. Simon stood at the center of something that did not feel like a place at all, but a state of being. Nalnis's voice entered him, quieter than before, with a tone that felt almost reverent. Human consciousness is not isolated. Every mind is a ripple in a unified field. The truth unfurled inside Simon, not as new knowledge, but as recognition. The field around him pulsed gently. and each pulse echoed through him with a resonance that felt like memory. He was not observing the field, he was part of it. Wave after wave moved through the darkness, each one carrying impressions of thought and emotion. Some felt familiar, as if belonging to others he had known without meeting. Some felt distant, ancient, carrying echoes of lives long forgotten by human history. The boundaries Simon believed separated him from others dissolved in these currents. There was no isolation here, no individuality trapped in skin and bone. Consciousness flowed like water, forming shapes, dissolving them, forming again. The illusion of separation was a construct, Nalnis explained, a temporary veil necessary for physical existence. Humans believed their minds were singular, contained, private, yet beneath the surface of their awareness, every thought resonated outward into the field, touching countless others. Every emotion sent ripples far beyond the self that experienced it. Humanity lived inside a shared ocean while believing themselves to be islands. The coming wave would reawaken this connection. Simon felt the cosmic pulse approaching through the vast field, traveling across light years with a slowness that felt deliberate. The wave carried no judgment, no agenda. It simply illuminated what already existed. When it touched Earth, the veil would thin. People would feel the thoughts of others more clearly, their emotions more intensely, their intuition more accurately. The field that had always been present would become undeniable. For some, this awakening would bring profound peace, dissolving loneliness, and expanding identity beyond the self. For others, it would be overwhelming, exposing them to the emotional storms of millions who had never learned to quiet their own minds. The pulse would not create unity or chaos. It would amplify whatever humanity carried into the moment of unveiling. Nalnis's presence expanded around Simon, merging briefly with the field before returning to a recognizable shape. The voice deepened, carrying the quiet gravity of a final truth. You were never separate. You only believed you were. The illusion had been comfortable. The reality was vast, and the wave would make that vastness impossible to ignore. The shimmering field of consciousness slowly receded, folding back into the metallic chamber as if reality itself were being reshaped around Simon's awareness. Nalnis remained in front of him, though now the alien's presence felt different, less like a separate being and more like a stabilizing anchor in a sea of shifting perception. Simon sensed that the revelations so far had been preparation, not conclusion. Everything he had seen pointed toward one truth. The wave would not be survived through knowledge alone. It required something internal, something the human mind had forgotten how to access. A soft vibration spread across the chamber floor, rising through Simon's body like a subtle hum. It centered in his chest, drawing his attention inward. Nalnis's voice entered him gently, no longer carrying the vastness of cosmic history but the precision of instruction. The pulse approaching Earth would amplify consciousness, and only those whose inner state was coherent would weather its intensity without fracturing. Coherence was not calmness, it was alignment, a state where breath, emotion, and intention fell into harmony. Simon felt a warmth gather beneath his ribs. Slow, intentional breathing, the first component of coherence. Nalnis guided his awareness to the simple act of inhaling and exhaling. But the experience was different from any breathing exercise Simon had ever attempted. With each breath, the chamber seemed to synchronize with him, its faint vibrations adjusting to match the rhythm of his lungs. As he inhaled, the metallic walls brightened slightly, and as he exhaled, they dimmed. Breath was not merely oxygen, it was a tool for anchoring consciousness within the body. Emotion followed. Emotional coherence. Simon felt Nalnis draw his attention to the space behind his sternum, where feelings often tightened, twisted, or became buried under thought. Here, emotion was not a storm but a signal. Coherence required choosing a steady emotional state, one that could withstand amplification without collapsing into chaos. Nalnis guided him toward gratitude, not as a feeling attached to an event, but as a frequency, warm and steady, like a fire that did not burn, yet illuminated everything it touched. Gratitude quieted fear. Gratitude aligned the heart. The third component surfaced naturally: inner alignment. Simon understood it not as doctrine or belief, but as unity between mind and feeling. Most humans lived split between thought and emotion, their actions pulled in conflicting directions. Alignment was the merging of intention and internal state, the point where what one desired, what one felt, and what one believed were no longer at war. As Simon settled into the triad of breath, emotion, and alignment, the chamber responded with a soft harmonic tone, almost musical. It resonated with his chest, vibrating through him with a sensation that felt both grounding and expansive. Nalnis revealed that this coherence equation was the only safe method to integrate the pulse. Without it, the amplification of consciousness would overwhelm the mind. With it, the wave would accelerate evolution rather than destabilization. The technique was simple, yet Simon felt its depth. Coherence was not something practiced once. It was cultivated, lived, breathed. The wave would not reward those who sought to control it. It would elevate those who matched its frequency. Nalnis let the final truth settle in Simon's awareness like a seed planted in fertile soil. Coherence was not protection from the wave. It was the doorway through which the new human would emerge. The chamber dimmed until it resembled the deep interior of a sleeping star, the metallic walls absorbing every trace of light. Simon felt the shift immediately. The air thickened, not physically, but perceptually, as if an unseen current pressed inward from every direction. Nalnis's presence expanded slightly, the faint luminescence outlining the alien form growing steadier, more defined. There was no spoken warning, no transition, only a calm certainty that the next step could not be postponed. The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop and rise at the same time, a paradox that made Simon's skin tighten. A subtle vibration coursed through the floor, rising until it reached the center of his chest. Nalnis informed him without words that the simulation was beginning. Not a vision, not a lesson, a direct immersion into the frequency of the approaching pulse. The first wave struck like pressure folding inward from the edges of reality. Simon gasped reflexively, though no air was missing from his lungs. His thoughts splintered under the weight of sensory overload. Images burst into his mind, blending past and present with no separation. He saw childhood memories he had long forgotten, moments of loneliness so sharp they felt recent. He saw failures he had buried, regrets he had layered beneath busyness, fears he had disguised as logic. The wave did not present them gently. It tore them loose all at once. His heart pounded with a frantic rhythm. Emotions surged in him like a storm breaking from the inside. Panic, grief, anger, guilt, confusion. They rose with such speed he could not separate one from another. Every suppressed feeling magnified until it became almost unbearable, filling him with a disorienting mixture of pain and clarity. He tried to control it. He tried to steady his breathing, to organize his thoughts, to push back against the flood. But resistance only intensified the pressure. The chamber's vibrations sharpened, mirroring the instability inside him. His knees weakened, his mind frayed. The simulation did not care about logic. It amplified what existed beneath it. Another wave surged through him, heavier, louder, almost consciousness-shattering. This time, he felt his sense of self begin to dissolve. The boundaries of his identity wavered, threatening to break apart like thin glass. He reached desperately for stability, for structure, for anything to cling to. There was nothing to hold. Instinct failed. Control crumbled. His resistance collapsed. And in the moment he stopped fighting, Something shifted. The wave did not lessen. It transformed. The pressure that had threatened to crush him spread outward into a strange warmth. The emotions that had overwhelmed him did not disappear, but reorganized, settling into a pattern he could finally feel without drowning in it. His heartbeat slowed. His mind cleared. The chamber's vibrations softened until they matched the rhythm of his breath. The simulation stabilized, not because the wave changed, but because he stopped resisting what it revealed. Nalnis's voice entered him softly, almost a whisper woven into the air itself. This is the lesson humanity must learn. Surrender was not defeat. It was alignment. And only through alignment could the wave become an awakening rather than a breaking. The chamber regained its faint luminescence, but Simon noticed that light itself now felt different, as though it carried more texture, more quiet intelligence than before. The residual echoes of the simulation still pulsed through his body, subtle yet undeniable. Nalnis watched him with an expression that was not human yet carried a depth of understanding that soothed the last tremors of his mind. Something in the alien's posture shifted, preparing Simon for a revelation not about catastrophe, but about an unexpected source of strength. A gentle wave of light passed through the chamber's walls, forming swirling patterns that resembled constellations. Within them, smaller points of brightness gathered, softer and more fluid than the stars Simon recognized. Nalnis's voice entered him again, but this time it carried a tone Simon had not sensed before. Not warning, not urgency, something closer to reverence. Children would be the first to endure the pulse with grace. Simon felt the truth of it before Nalnis expanded on it. Children were not yet burdened by the structures adults carried. Their minds were not tangled in rigid beliefs, nor weighed down by decades of emotional residue. Their hearts had not learned to armor themselves in distrust. Their perception remained open, flexible, unfiltered by the illusions of control. When the pulse arrived, it would meet them without resistance. Nalnis illuminated the chamber with scenes of young minds, their consciousness appearing like luminous threads in the unified field. Each thread vibrated with a natural coherence adults rarely carried. Their emotional frequencies were fluid rather than fixed. Their intuition, though often dismissed by older generations, pulsed brightly, unrestricted by logic's narrow boundaries. The pulse would amplify these qualities first. Children would not only adapt, they would lead. Simon watched the patterns shift, seeing images of what this awakening might look like. Enhanced intuition emerging naturally, dreams carrying clarity, adults struggled to achieve even in deep meditation, heightened empathy, allowing them to sense the internal states of others without effort. The wave would ignite dormant capacities they had always possessed, but had not yet learned to articulate. Adults, Nalnis explained, would misinterpret this at first. Many would attempt to force children back into rigid systems built for a previous era. Education models, designed to suppress creativity and reinforce conformity, would clash with the new frequencies rising in younger minds. Some adults would view the children as unfocused or rebellious, never realizing that they were witnessing the early stages of an evolutionary shift. But the wise would learn from them. Children would model the very adaptability adults needed. Their openness, emotional fluidity, curiosity, and instinctive trust in their own inner signals were the exact qualities that made coherence possible. Adults who approached them with humility rather than authority would discover that the younger generation held the blueprint for navigating the pulse. Nalnis allowed the final truth to settle in Simon's awareness like a quiet flame. Humanity's survival would not depend on its oldest minds, but its youngest hearts. The pulse would reveal that evolution was already beginning, and the first awakened humans would be those who had not yet learned to fear themselves. A soft tremor rippled through the chamber, not physical but perceptual, as if reality itself were inhaling before speaking. Simon felt the shift immediately. The air thickened, carrying an awareness he could not name, and Nalnis's presence expanded with a gravity that warned the next truth would not be gentle. The alien's luminous form flickered slightly. Not from instability, but from the sheer density of information preparing to move through the space. Before the year 2026 arrived, humanity would experience a series of unmistakable symptoms. Not catastrophes, not malfunctions, early awakenings. Nalnis woven the truth into Simon's consciousness like threads of quiet lightning, each one illuminating a different aspect of the human experience that was already changing. The first symptom would be emotional volatility. Humans would find themselves feeling emotions they could no longer suppress. Tears without reason, sudden anger that felt foreign, waves of sadness rising from nowhere. But these would not be breakdowns. They would be purges. The pulse could not amplify what remained buried, so the psyche would begin loosening old knots on its own. Those who resisted these feelings would struggle. Those who allowed them to surface would stabilize. Following that emotional shift would come sudden life changes. Careers ending abruptly, relationships dissolving after years of quiet strain, moves, transformations, unexpected opportunities appearing as though summoned from nothing. Many would believe their lives were falling apart, unaware that the structures collapsing were the ones incapable of withstanding the coming frequency. The wave demanded authenticity. Anything out of alignment would begin to dismantle. Dreams would intensify next. Not ordinary dreams, but vivid, symbolic, startlingly clear experiences that felt more real than waking life. Some would dream of past lives. Others would dream of futures. Many would dream of places, beings, or landscapes they had never encountered yet felt deeply familiar with. Sleep would become a portal for integration, guiding minds gently into states they could not reach while awake. Intuition would rise like a tide. People would begin sensing intentions before words were spoken, knowing outcomes before events unfolded, feeling subtle shifts in energy without understanding why. Logic would still function, but it would no longer lead. The deeper intelligence of the heart would take precedence, though most would resist its guidance at first. Discomfort in old patterns would follow. Habits that once felt safe would suddenly feel suffocating. Roles people had played all their lives would feel too small. The familiar would no longer provide comfort, because the resonance of the coming wave would expose anything misaligned with one's true nature. Relationships would shift rapidly as well. Some connections would strengthen with unprecedented depth, as if souls recognized one another beneath the human mask. Others would fracture overnight, the energetic mismatch finally too loud to ignore. These endings would not be failures. They would be recalibrations. Nalnis allowed Simon to absorb the weight of these truths one by one. None of the symptoms were signs of collapse. They were markers of emergence. The world was not breaking. It was preparing. The discomfort humanity was already feeling was the first whisper of a transformation older than civilization itself. These were not problems. They were precursors. The awakening had already begun. The chamber dimmed again, but this time the darkness felt heavier, as though it carried the density of unspoken truths long avoided by an entire species. Simon sensed the shift before Nalnis spoke. A pressure formed in the air, not threatening, but undeniably grave, like standing at the edge of a storm that had been gathering for centuries. Nalnis's presence deepened, and Simon understood instinctively that what came next was not merely information. It was a warning wrapped in inevitability. Before elevation comes exposure. Nalnis allowed the words to settle inside Simon's consciousness with the weight of a universal law. Humanity, so eager to ascend, had forgotten that nothing rises without first revealing what anchors it. The approaching wave would not bypass what humans refused to face. It would amplify it, intensify it, illuminate the darkest corners until denial became impossible. The chamber walls shifted into swirling shadows, forming shapes that pulsed with emotion rather than form. Nalnis explained that every species entering a higher frequency encounters its collective shadow before transformation. For Earth, this shadow was vast, formed from generations of unprocessed grief, suppressed fear, unresolved trauma, and the illusion of separation. It lived in institutions, in relationships, in systems, and deeply in individual hearts. As the simulation expanded, Simon saw humanity's shadow rising through symbolic imagery, anger erupting in sudden waves across populations, division widening between groups who once coexisted, conspiratorial thinking, multiplying as fear, sought explanations to justify itself, distrust, spreading like smoke through societies already tense, people turning inward and outward at the same time, unsure whom to blame for feelings they could no longer suppress. Nalnis clarified that none of this was collapse. It was cleansing. The shadow could not be carried into a higher state of consciousness. It had to surface. Humans would misinterpret this as the world falling apart. They would believe society was unraveling, unaware that unraveling was a necessary step for reweaving. Old systems would appear to break, not because they were under attack, but because they were no longer compatible with the frequency rising beneath them. The wave would amplify all emotional content. That meant love would deepen, compassion would intensify, intuition would awaken. But it also meant fear would surge before dissolving. The wave revealed, not destroyed. It magnified what was present so that nothing remained hidden. Simon watched scenes unfold, people confronting buried truths about themselves, communities fracturing before reorganizing into new forms, nations struggling with ideological storms that forced long-ignored issues to the surface. The illusion of stability would crack not because humanity was doomed, but because the foundation needed rebuilding. Nalnis's voice softened, carrying both warning and reassurance. Cleansing was chaotic only to those who resisted it. Those who understood the process would find clarity in the turbulence. Those who met their shadow with curiosity instead of fear would transform with it. The darkest moments were not signs of the end. They were signs of the beginning. The collective shadow was rising, not to consume humanity, but to free it. Only what had been unconscious could be healed. Only what had been denied could be released. And only through this exposure could Earth step into the frequency the galaxy had been preparing for 12,000 years. The storm was not destruction, it was purification. And the pulse would ensure nothing impure remained hidden. The chamber brightened with a muted glow, as though unseen hands were pulling light from the fabric of space itself. Simon felt an unfamiliar stillness settle over him, not empty but expectant, like the quiet just before a vast truth reveals itself. Nalnis remained steady, their presence radiating a patience that suggested this chapter of the revelation mattered more than any before it. The wave was coming. That much Simon understood. But now he sensed that the deeper question was not what the wave would do. It was who humanity would be when it arrived. Nalnis began by illuminating a subtle truth. The wave responded not to intelligence, status, or belief, but to authenticity. The frequency of a human life was shaped not by how perfect one was, but by how honest one was with oneself. The pulse did not demand purity. It demanded presence. The first step on the path was releasing obsessive control. Nalnis allowed Simon to feel what human control truly was. A tightening of the mind, a narrowing of perception, a clutching at structures that were already dissolving. Control was the illusion that safety came from domination rather than alignment. When the wave moved through Earth, attempts to cling to the familiar would only magnify suffering. Those who loosened their grip, who allowed uncertainty to unfold without resistance, would experience the pulse as expansion rather than collapse. The second step was the processing of unresolved emotions. Simon felt this truth resonate sharply within him. Humans carried entire lifetimes of unspoken memories, unacknowledged griefs, and fears buried so deeply they had become indistinguishable from personality. The wave would lift these to the surface, not to punish, but to free. Those who allowed themselves to feel would lighten. Those who denied would fracture beneath the weight of their own unexamined shadow. Emotional honesty was not optional. It was preparation. The third step was cultivating trust. Not blind trust in external forces, but a quiet, steady confidence in the deeper intelligence woven into the fabric of existence. Trust was the bridge between fear and coherence. When humans trusted that their inner guidance was real, the wave would amplify that guidance. When they doubted their own intuition, the wave would amplify their doubt. Nalnis emphasized that this trust was not belief. It was remembering. The final step before the pulse was reconnecting with inner essence. Simon sensed this was the core of everything Nalnis had been teaching. Inner essence was not personality, not identity, not thoughts or emotions. It was the silent awareness beneath them all, the part of consciousness untouched by fear or conditioning. Humans had forgotten how to listen to it, but the wave would amplify it, pulling people back toward the truth of who they were before the world told them otherwise. Nalnis allowed these steps to echo through Simon's awareness, not as commandments, but as invitations. The wave in the year 2026 was not a test humanity had to pass. It was an accelerator. It would not reward perfection. It would respond to authenticity. Those who met it honestly would rise. Those who hid from themselves would struggle. The path was simple. The path was difficult. The path was unavoidable. And the wave was already approaching. A profound stillness settled over the chamber, deeper than any silence Simon had felt since his arrival. It was the kind of quiet that held meaning, as if the space itself recognized a threshold had been reached. Nalnis's form dimmed slightly, not from weakness, but from a shift in intention. The alien's presence contracted and intensified, focusing entirely on Simon with a resonance that felt almost sacred. Simon sensed, without needing explanation, that the revelations were nearing their end. What remained was not information, but purpose. Nalnis stepped closer, the air around them rippling in slow waves that carried an almost melodic frequency. When the alien spoke, the words entered Simon not as sound but as unmistakable truth. He had not been brought here by accident. He had not been chosen because he was exceptional. He had been chosen because he was willing, even if he did not yet understand what that meant. Nalnis explained that billions would feel the effects of the coming pulse, but very few would recognize what was happening. Many would panic. Many would resist. Many would drown in the rising tide of their own unprocessed inner worlds. But a small percentage of humans would awaken early, remembering fragments of truths they had carried across lifetimes. These early awakeners would become anchors during the transition. Not leaders, not authority figures. Anchors. Steady points of clarity others could gravitate toward when the internal storms intensified. Simon felt the weight of this recognition settle into his chest like a quiet flame. Nalnis continued, explaining that Simon's role was not to convince the unwilling or to argue with those who clung to old systems. His purpose was simpler and far more difficult. He was to remain coherent when others collapsed. He was to remember when others forgot. He was to hold steady when the pulse magnified everything unresolved in humanity. And through that steadiness, he would help guide those who were ready to awaken. The chamber darkened again, and Nalnis reached out with one elongated hand. The touch to Simon's forehead was gentle, almost weightless. Yet the moment contact was made, a surge of information ignited inside him like a star being born. A flood of visions, symbols, frequencies, and memories poured into his consciousness in a span of seconds that felt like eternity. He saw patterns of energy moving through the galaxy. He saw maps of human evolutionary timelines. He saw methods of stabilizing others during the wave. He saw truths humanity had forgotten long before recorded history. The information did not overwhelm him. It integrated, settling into layers of awareness he could not yet fully access, but would, when the time came. Nalnis withdrew their hand, though the lingering warmth remained, glowing faintly beneath Simon's skin. The alien's voice softened into something almost tender. Simon would forget parts of this encounter upon returning to Earth. It was necessary for his integration. But when the pulse approached, the memories would surface. The knowledge would return. The purpose would ignite. Nalnis offered a final message, not as command but as prophecy woven gently into Simon's bones. You will remember when others forget, and you will help prepare those who are ready to listen. The chamber pulsed once, as if sealing the promise into the fabric of reality itself. Simon woke with a jolt, the sensation so abrupt it stole his breath before he even understood where he was. His ceiling hovered above him, familiar yet unreal, as though reality itself had been reassembled around his body. The silence of his bedroom was thick, too still, too watchful. Hours had passed, though no dream could explain where he had truly been. His pulse throbbed in his chest with a low, steady vibration, the same resonance that had hummed through Nalnis's chamber. It did not fade. It lingered like a beacon. He sat up slowly, sensing that the air in the room felt denser, charged with an invisible current. When his feet touched the floor, a faint tremor rippled through him, as if his body remembered an energy Earth had not yet met. Nothing in his home had changed, yet everything felt altered. Even the shadows seemed more alert, more conscious. Drawn by an instinct he could not name, Simon walked outside. The moment he opened the door, the night greeted him with a presence he had never felt before. The sky stretched overhead with its usual stars, but they no longer appeared distant. They vibrated faintly, pulsing in a rhythm that matched the resonance in his chest, like signals waiting for him to decode them. The air itself hummed, subtle but alive, carrying the quiet anticipation of something immense, drawing closer with every passing moment. Simon inhaled deeply, and the breath felt different, fuller, as though it carried the memory of another world. Nalnis's touch still glowed faintly at the center of his forehead, not visible, but unmistakably present, like an ember of a truth now embedded within him. He understood then that his return home was not the end of the encounter. It was the beginning of everything Nalnis had prepared him to face. He turned slowly, not to the sky, but to the unseen audience, the ones who would someday hear this story, the ones who would feel the wave before they understood its origin. And with a voice steadier than he expected, Simon issued the warning Nalnis had etched into him. 2026 will not destroy us. It will reveal us, our fears, our truths, our shadows, our potential. The wave will amplify whatever lives within us, and only those willing to face themselves will rise with it. The resonance in his chest intensified for a moment, as if confirming the message. Simon felt no fear, only clarity. He knew that many would not listen, many would deny, many would resist, but some just enough would feel something stir inside them, the same faint pull that had brought him to the edge of an alien dawn. To those people, he offered a final invitation, carried not as prophecy, but as preparation. Now is the time to awaken, to release what weighs you down, to reconnect with the essence you once knew, to prepare your mind, your heart, your frequency, and to share this truth with those who sense something coming but cannot yet name it. Because the wave is real, the shift is near, and readiness begins long before the sky begins to glow.